Okay, so it's been a while, but I've decided it's finally time for me to share my experience with everyone. I currently work as a forest service worker. I've done this for not too many years, and something jogged my memory recently. This is something that happened when I was much younger, and is something that I've not really been able to forget. It was I and a group of friends who decided to explore a cabin which had been long abandoned in a forested area close to where we all lived. We were all excited to go there. There were rumours that there was more than meets the eye there. We basically were convinced that it was haunted and that we're going to find all kinds of ghosts and things there. You know, just typical things to get teenage boys excited about exploring. So we head out. As we head out, it had been raining recently, and our parents told us not to get dirty. I actually had a big umbrella, so I was pretty happy. I knew too that I could probably utilize this as some kind of weapon if I really needed. So we're heading out into the forest, and it has a really cool vibe to it. We're pretty sure where this thing is, and we're excited to go. There was the odd leaves falling down, and it wasn't too far away from Halloween, so we were definitely ready to be spooked out. It's funny saying that in hindsight. So we start walking when suddenly a man appears on the path up ahead. He looks pretty weird with a long white beard. He's saying things but kind of stopping every few seconds. Nobody understands what he wants, but he looks really weird. He suddenly locks eyes with me and for some reason just won't stop staring at me. I find this especially weird, and I felt like I was almost caught in a trance while making eye contact with this weirdo. I tell him to leave me alone. Eventually though, he walks off into the stream, literally into the water going uphill. I don't know how he was able to do so, but he literally just takes off, and that was the last we ever saw of him. We look at each other and decide to start jogging a bit. The thing is, we don't know who this person is or why he's out here, but he's definitely weird. Maybe it's some kind of guy that likes to live off the land or something, who knows. But we left him to go his separate way to us. I felt pretty good at the time. I felt like this is it. This is what we wanted. Everything's coming together suddenly, and this is the moment that we've been waiting for. We start to make up some things and imagine that he's probably come from the cabin that we're heading to. We eventually see the cabin, and that thing looked scary. It was almost like it had just been planted in the middle of nowhere. This is long before we had mobile phones or any good way to communicate with our parents, so you really felt the desolation of the area. Especially because, well, we lived in a pretty remote area to begin with, but if you go into the forest, there's all kinds of crazy things out here. We had regular sightings of Bigfoots and UFOs, you know, all the good stuff. But this thing felt different. We bravely start making our way towards the cabin. Apparently there's another group of friends who one of the people I'm with knows, and said allegedly if you go there on your own at night, crazy things will happen to you. The ghosts will try and kill you. As he said that, my friend made me jump and it annoyed me. But we pressed forward and eventually get to the cabin. There was no door to worry about. We ended up heading in, and I can see a way down to a cellar. Now this is interesting. This wasn't on the script. We knew there was more to this place, but none of us expected to find something like that so early. So that was definitely an interesting moment for us. We have a look around, and there doesn't seem to be anybody else present. That's when we realise it. We call him Steve. Crazy Steve has appeared again. He seems to have a pan on his head too, which was really weird. We think, God, does he live here? Is he cooking? But he can't be, the place is abandoned. He's just watching from behind a rock, saying all kinds of gibberish, but clearly in our direction. You know the homeless guy who ends up in the freezer on The Simpsons? Well, it kind of looked like him. He's wearing actually similar clothes, which is quite funny thinking of it now. He doesn't seem to be getting any closer though, so we decide to investigate a bit more. I know this probably isn't smart or wise to turn your back on an absolute weirdo living out there, but he seems to be relatively harmless. I can't stop thinking about that basement though. What could be in there? It was definitely odd. So we wait in here for a little while, and we realise that Steve's got a bit closer now. He's moved even further along to a rock. He always seems to hide behind these big rocks or trees, like he knows what he's doing to not be seen by us. Yeah, I'm getting more and more freaked out now, and we decide that we should probably go back. Now we've decided to start picking up the pace a little bit. We started running now to try and get away from him. At first he doesn't do anything. Then a loud thud happens and I'm forced to look behind myself. There he is, throwing something towards us. It's a pan. We can hear more gibberish in a very loud and dark tone, and we can hear pat pat pat. He's chasing after us. My god, was he quick. One of my friends screams out, how can this old guy be so quick? Honestly, it was almost inhuman the pace that he set. He was gaining on us, and all of us were pretty healthy and should have had much more pace on him, but we don't seem to in that moment, and it's really frustrating. We start running as fast as we possibly can, desperate to get away from this weirdo. Eventually we make it out of the forest and we seem to have lost him. What the heck was that? We all say, as we're all entirely dumbfounded as to who that was and why he was chasing us. We eventually get back home safely and not too much else happens, but something was stuck in my mind. I just couldn't forget about that guy in that cabin. I don't know why. And that led me to a few years later, when I was in the area on my own. When I got a bit older, I got into the habit of going for night walks in that place. I'd long forgotten about that guy for the meantime, and I felt pretty safe out there. I was going for one of my night jogs actually on this specific occasion, one where I was my typical indecisive self, and I couldn't decide whether to jog or walk, so I did both periodically. And would you know, there's a cabin up ahead. It looks so nice, so inviting and enticing, and there's the thunder. A storm was brewing. It just felt too perfect and excellent to be out there. I suddenly got buckets of energy from who knows where, and I decided that it's my time to investigate alone. I wanted to know what was in that basement. Nobody had told me this stuff before, and the adrenaline and excitement was taking over for me. I take a moment to look around and I think, Steve, I hope you're not here now. As I go in and I say sorry, almost as though I was acknowledging in my head that what I was about to do wasn't smart, but I was going to do it anyway. So off I go, towards the cabin. Every footstep I take, I can feel my heart beating quicker and quicker as I get closer and closer to this cabin. And what do you know? The next moment I'm in there. Yes, it's just like I remember. It's almost like every room that I look into is another part of nostalgia for me as I feel more and more excited seeing it. You know what, I'm going to come back here with all my buddies. We've got to do this again and explore. And then I see it. The path with stairs, and I can't help but go into it. So I do so, and I go up initially, then I go down, deeper and deeper. This place is huge. Something falls next to me and I can hear almost an echo, a reverberation. Wow, this is cool. I then realise that it goes on quite far, and I want to see how far this thing actually goes. So off I go. There's quite a large concrete wall to my left, then a small tunnel which goes off to the right next to it. I actually have a flashlight with me, so I flick it on for a second. I tied it onto my sweatband that I'm wearing, and I've got pretty good visibility. I had to put my sweatband the wrong way, kind of having it vertically on my head, but it does the job perfectly. I was almost like a surgeon or mechanic now, operating with true precision. So I start making my way along when suddenly I see a drop up ahead of me. I slowly feel around the sides of it, and it doesn't seem too large. I can see the bottom for a second with my flashlight, and would you know, the thing falls off. It knocks itself out along with the battery at the same time and I can't find it, so I go to turn back and then I feel warmth up my arm and suddenly a pulse. It's my pulse. I'm grabbed and almost fall headfirst into the tunnel, but I stop myself and scream. Something is gripping onto me. I reach down and feel a hand, a human arm. I cannot seem to loosen this thing's grip until I smash it as hard as I can. I actually miss and really hurt my hand hitting the side at first, but I'm able to get free. I don't hear anything after that and I scurry back screaming. I'm screaming every few seconds while I catch my breath and eventually make my way back up the stairs again. I start running and I can't really see clear. I realise now that lots of dust and things has kicked into my eyes and I say, how can this happen? It can't get worse for me. I can't see where I'm going, but luckily I know the area well as I run through some of the forestry. It seems like the forest is closing in on me as I get closer and closer to escaping. I kept up a beautiful pace and eventually make it to the border of the woods. I start screaming over and over again, not knowing what on earth happened to me. Was it Steve? Did he finally come back to get me? I don't know. I eventually make it home quickly and I tell my parents about what's happened, and my dad insists on calling the cops or going back there himself, but my mum says no, just leave it, it's probably just some weird homeless person out there. I then vowed to myself and my parents that I'm never going to go back there again, and you know what? I didn't. I never found out why that happened or who it was. I don't know what made me think of it again so much recently, but I just want the answers, but at the same time I don't. Now back in around March of this year, I went camping with a friend, my boyfriend and 3 dogs. My friend slept in his tent with his dog and I slept in my tent with the 2 dogs and my boyfriend. My friend's tent was about 30 feet away from ours and we were camping in northern GA in the mountains off an old Forest Service road. We're right next to a creek. For context, I'm an experienced backpacker and am familiar with the unusual nighttime sounds like the rustling of leaves, sticks breaking and other things like that. I've had a lot of experiences by myself camping, so it's rare that I get spooked out by anything other than humans nearby, as I'm aware of the dangers of travelling solo as a female. However, this particular night, I wake up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread that I've never felt before. I check my phone and it's about 3 AM to 3:40. Now, I really had to use the bathroom and I am really debating on whether I wanted to put on my hiking boots and venture out or just wait until the daylight. I didn't want to wake up my dogs in particular because they'll get excited by the sounds of me putting on the boots and stuff and they'd want to go out too. So I'm in my tent and that's when I noticed it. It's almost like a hum, but not in the pleasant way where it's a tune or anything like that. It's a low-pitched hum that is reverberating throughout the camp and forest and through my body. It has 2 tones. It starts with a relatively higher pitch one, and it would switch alternatively to lower pitches after a period of time. Then it would start over without a break or any kinds of sounds at all. It wasn't soft either. It felt like it was covering the entire wooded area that we're in. It didn't sound like an animal, a person, a machine or anything like that I've ever heard before. At this point, I absolutely can hold off from the bathroom, but I'm struggling so much that I have to put my boots on and quietly tell the dogs to stay put. My boyfriend's still sleeping, and zip my tent and go outside. And the entire campsite was covered in this spooky fog, but it felt like it was more my vision than that, not the actual air. I can't see. The 2-tone humming actually got louder. I do my business maybe 5 feet from my tent, and I quickly note back into it and bury myself in the sleeping bag with a sweatshirt over my head, trying to drown out and ignore the humming. The dogs actually raise their heads and growl a few times throughout the experience, but It wasn't unusual for that to happen when camping. I never saw any figures or lights in the woods, but I also was not looking for them and was trying to ignore the entire experience. I don't know what the humming could have possibly been. This happened many years ago when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I wouldn't describe the area I was in as necessarily backwoods, but it was a wooded area with a 100+ acre ranch. The land is in the southwest part of the United States. My family owns a property and we have family reunions every year and all stay there for about 5 days to camp. There's an area of the ranch where we all set up camp and cook and eat. Getting to that part of the ranch actually requires driving through a small village and several gates for about 2 miles. The first gate beyond the village is slightly past a set of railroad tracks. Now, the story goes on a bit, but I've been camping at the ranch for as long as I could remember, and the land was private. My parents would allow me to go off on my own during the day, as long as I didn't go far. I'd spend time walking the property near our camp, looking for arrowheads and trying to catch tadpoles in the ponds. On this day, I left the large camp area for lunch, which was around 11:30. I told my mum I was going to a nearby creek. I planned on catching some tadpoles and bringing them back to camp, back in time for a swimming trip my cousins were planning. They wanted to go to a nearby river and I really didn't want to miss it. I made it down to the creek and got several tadpoles. I probably spent a total of 15 minutes down there. To get back to camp, I would have needed to either climb up a relatively steep embankment with a lot of loose rock or circle around on a longer route with a flat trail. I'd usually go up the embankment, but I actually didn't have a top for the bottle of water where I'd catch the tadpoles, and I didn't really want to risk slipping and spilling them out or killing them. I had never walked the longer trail by myself, but I had with my dad and felt confident that I could make my way back to the camp. As I walked back to the camp, I had my head down looking for arrowheads in the washed out areas of the trails. I started feeling a little creeped out as I continued walking. We all know the feeling like somebody's watching us. It's really unsettling, but I chalked it up to getting spooked out on the trail by myself. Now for the next part, I can't explain it whatsoever. It's as if a light switch was turned on or somebody snapped their fingers and I come back to reality. Except when I came to, I wasn't on the trail I'd been on before. I was near the railroad tracks and it's completely dark. My mum was standing in front of me, shaking my shoulders and yelling, "Where are you?" Now there's two things that I clearly remembered about those moments. That I came to, and the look of anger, relief and fear in my mum's eyes as she's yelling at me, and in the confusion as to what was going on, the last thing I remembered was walking on the trail back to camp, and now suddenly it was dark and I was at the railroad's tracks leading to the ranch, which is over 2 miles away. The best way I can describe it is to compare it to the movie The Butterfly Effect. The main character would be living in one moment, then suddenly he'd wake up somewhere different. My parents drove me back to camp and I learned it was 10:30 p.m. This meant that I'd been gone for 11 hours, about 10 and a half of which I can't account for to this day. My parents and all my family had understandably feared really that I wasn't going to return. They've been looking for me all day. I was really a good kid when I was growing up and I'd never stay out past my set times or anything like that, so this was certainly something out of character for me. Now my parents were baffled. I tried to explain that I have no memory of it, but they didn't believe me. They thought I got lost and maybe was embarrassed to admit it. This is the only time that I've ever experienced anything similar to this. I can't explain how unsettling it is to not be able to account for hours on end. Was it coincidence that it had happened, or was it something else? How have I lost almost 11 hours of my life like this, having no clue as to where they went? Now it's the early March of 2021. I was just barely recovering from a significant concussion, enough to where I could actually drive again. I still couldn't work for another few weeks and couldn't look at screens or even read, so there was plenty of time for me just to go on short walks and stuff to pass the time in a way that wouldn't aggravate my head. I went to the small trailhead that I haven't been to before. If it wasn't for the trees, I think the houses about half a mile away would have been relatively visible, but I had a weird feeling that I shouldn't go alone. But as always, I was armed with my CCW and figured that I was just being goofy and maybe dreary or something. Now, I approached the trailhead with a strange feeling. I felt like I shouldn't be there. I saw a single car in the parking lot and figured that maybe since a previous car of mine had been broken into at trailhead a few years before, it might happen again. Now, I backed in and hung out for a few minutes. I see two dudes with fishing poles coming from the left where I can't see clearly, but there must be a rushing river. They got in the car and left, and I shouldn't be here feelings start to go away. Being an idiot, I still figured that I should go up the trail. I had no idea how long it was or where it went, but I really didn't intend on going the full way unless it is short. I just wanted to go for a walk outdoors. The trees hadn't gotten their leaves back and it was dreary, as I mentioned earlier, but that usually doesn't put me on edge. As I walked, the strong feeling to turn back gets more and more obvious. I felt myself glancing over constantly. It wasn't fun anymore to be up there. It's only been a couple of minutes too. I mean, the feeling of dread was so immediately strong that I still can see my car, and I finally decide that it's time to go back because of how strong the feeling is. I turned around, hand on my pistol in its holster, and stop and listen. After a few seconds, I hear big footsteps to my right. It was a big snap of a branch that had been on the ground already, maybe 25 to 30 yards away. I'm not sure if this matters, but the branch was already on the ground, so it wasn't dead for. I've been working in audio for way too long, and I can tell you what the sound was. Now, it's important to mention that, and I can't really tell exactly what the sound is, but it sounds like somebody's accidentally stepped on a branch. So I wait a second or two after the big snap. I look over to the place it's come from, able to see what felt like a decent amount because of the lack of leaves on the trees, but nothing looks alive. Not wanting to pull a trigger, I'm quite fearful of triggering a pursuit instinct in whatever it is. I start walking down the trail, having my sidearm in hand drawn at that point. My car wasn't far, and I'm a naturally fast walker, so it seems to be the best approach. I get back to my car in a minute or two, and heard nothing at all besides the nearby river rustling by. Having backed into my spot, I started my car and put it in drive, but had my foot on the brakes. I wanted to see if anything came into sight and then peel out if I need. Nothing ever showed itself, not that I can see anyway. As I left the area, the feeling immediately went away, but I feel shaken up. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to make any claims as I mentioned, but it might have been a mountain lion probably, as this occurred near the Box Elder area of Utah, and they're often seen even coming down into cities. So, one still in the mountains, but only half a mile away from fancy houses isn't too strange. Now also, whatever it was, clearly knew it revealed itself when it stepped on the branch, and was smart enough to recognize that I immediately looked in its direction as a result. The fact that something saw me notice its mistake, and that I still saw absolutely nothing in turn makes you think that it was a mountain lion or somebody camouflaged. Also, the sense of dread before I even got to the trailhead, I've only felt this a few times, but even if I do, then I'm usually right about something. I live in Australia, and we don't have much woodlands here besides a few that span on for a couple of 100 acres or so. Nothing like what Americans have. and when I was younger, I'd get lost in these woods a lot, and sometimes even sleep in them for a couple of days at most, surviving off fish and creek water. I never had any creepy encounters besides this one time. I was about 10 years old, and just like I do at least once every 2 or 3 years, I gotten lost in the woods again. I was completely fine during this day, as I'd eaten an hour prior to realizing that I have no idea as to where I was going, and the old here we go again moment took over, and I decided to walk around and find some sticks to make a little fire. I knew a lot about outdoor survival, as my family would often go camping a lot, and I watched lots of videos about it, as it interested me and I loved the woods. So I set up the fire as it starts to become dark, and was about to put out my fire before I saw a small deer on the tree line, just nearly out of range of my firelight. It was just staring at me, which gave me some chills, but I just went, "Oh, that's a deer," and waved to it. The deer then scurried off into the woods and I can't hear it anymore. But I suddenly hear this weird sound, like twigs snapping all of a sudden from a much larger deer or something. It then comes out from the bushes, revealing itself. At this point I realised something's up, so I stood up and stared as this deer started staring back at me, which is much bigger. I'm mentally prepared for the idea of this thing charging me. The deer started walking a bit towards me, and I backed up a little and crouched down, but as the deer kept getting closer and closer, I kept backing up and looking down, and realising this guy had his hoofs directly in towards where the fire is, and wasn't reacting whatsoever. This creeped me out. I mean, his fur was burning, and it was starting to burn some of its skin, and it just wasn't reacting. Immediately, I set off bolting, but this thing heard me and kept on. Not really running fast enough to keep up with my legs though. I eventually come up to a small hill and jump down into a bush trying to hide from it, and that's when it happened. The scariest thing of my life, which I remember so well. The silhouette of the deer against the moonlight appeared as, I stated, the deer let out this blood-curdling scream that I've never heard before, and all of a sudden, the silhouette started caving in on itself. I could hear bones snapping and flesh ripping, and the thing gets smaller and smaller, but then suddenly seems to get even bigger, and I close my eyes. When I open them, I see the silhouette of a man where he was. I say hi, hi, and repeat this for about 10 minutes, and there's just silence. He's now stood a few meters away, but the man just walks off into the trees, and I hear the awful snapping sounds again. That was the last I ever seen of that thing. I'm 21 now, and the incident was 10 to 11 years ago, and I still remember the silhouette and the noises of the bones snapping like it happened yesterday. I'm a park ranger, and I'd like to share my story with you all today. More in the sense that I want to get some opinions on exactly what happened to me. I mean, I have my own view, but I guess in my line of duty I probably think differently about threats and dangers, so I really want the outside perspective. I haven't really spoke to too many of my friends about these things because, well, even where I work, I guess like rumours spread really easily and things. I mean, it wasn't the other day that I told people at my job that I was going to be leaving soon, and obviously I didn't give them permission to tell everybody else, but what happened? When I go back, I get complete random people that I barely even speak to saying, "Oh, you're leaving soon?" Yeah, I don't know, it's something that's always annoyed me. I just really don't like it or appreciate it. I feel like it's a big breach of trust, and with something like this happening to me, I don't want that to be the case, but like I said, I want to hear what people think about my experience in my own words, not from the words of others who have potentially misconstrued of what happened, and the truth is what's important here. So, as I said, I'm a park ranger, but I'm going to be leaving the job soon. Now, it's not in the sense that I don't enjoy it like I used to, I just kind of need to evolve as a person, and I think being out there on my own was good for a while, but not for too long. I'm kind of like a social butterfly in the sense that I really need to be around other people, And as much as I enjoy being out there, it kind of becomes the same picture each day. And regardless of how relaxed I feel, I really feel like I need more. And I'm probably too young to have this kind of job in some regards, but not in others. So, I was stationed somewhere that we have a beautiful lake. Now, this lake is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most blue ones that you'll ever see. I can't remember exactly why it was so blue, but it was a really beautiful thing. Now, on the day in particular that this event happened, everything was going like normal. I was doing a number of my duties, and, well, in my country, one of those duties is to pick up rubbish that people leave behind and litter and things, however you guys say it. I didn't really have an issue with this, it just annoyed me because sometimes in the sun it would make bags melt a bit, and I guess you can imagine how bad that actually smelled. It wasn't a nice thing. But again, someone had to do it, and often it was us. Now, I started picking up some litter which is on the trail, and this actually annoyed me. I think, why on earth do people want to trash this place? I mean, literally, that's all they're doing. But I have my little grabber thing, and I'm putting everything inside the bag. So, to be honest, I'm actually enjoying the time more than I expected to at this point. The trees are given a really nice shade now, so there was no need for me to rush trying to get out of the sun. I have a camel pack, so I'm just constantly drinking from this on my journey. Now the bag gets pretty full, but I kind of had like a holster thing I could hook it onto, so it would kind of hang off the side of me if I use that stick, if that makes sense. But it wasn't too heavy, it was manageable really. Now while I'm doing this, I do notice something strange. There seems to be some kind of diving suit. Well, at least that's how it appears to me. It's probably like, I don't know if you've seen one of the Batmans with Penguin, but the old one. You know the cat lady, the thing she wore in that? It was more similar to that, but obviously it had been in the water at some point. Now, I stop for a moment and think to myself, well, we do get some people that go swimming here, but you wouldn't really want to wear this for that job. And I think this is pretty bizarre. Now, I've prod around a little bit, and I'm worried that maybe it's something weird that shouldn't be here. I gather my thoughts for a moment and realise that it's probably best if I just continue on my way. I'm going to have to come back for it another time. This is quite annoying really, because I have to go all the way back and get another one of those smelly bags to take this thing. I did try and lift it up originally with my grabber thing, but it was far too heavy and I don't want that dripping on me while I'm walking. It will not be a fun time. But I'm prepared for this and I continue on my trail. I get to a point where I decide that now's a good time to get some food in me and stop for a little bit. I'm eating some of my sandwiches and I've got some peanuts with me when I notice something drifting off in the lake. It's really bizarre. It kind of looks like some kind of boat, but it's definitely not a canoe. It's slightly bigger than that. But it seems to just vanish suddenly. It's almost like it sunk down into the water, and I get a little suspicious of this. Now, bearing in mind that I'm actually seeing this through some trees, and I'm not 100% convinced myself that what I'm seeing is actually real or not. I also had my cool shades on, so that probably made it a lot harder. I take them off though, and I still can't see much of anything. I don't really have the best of eyes, to be honest, and annoyingly I left my glasses back at our old station office, whatever you call it. So I stand there observing, and I don't see anything initially. I note this is odd, and I think, well, I've got some more trash to pick up, and I continue on my way. Now, one thing I'd like to note is that I didn't see anybody else during this time, which is a pretty bizarre thing because, well, usually you see a couple of people around, but today, it was like one of those western ghost towns of today, where nobody's there but people were once. So, I decided that I should probably get heading back now, but not before I take in a beautiful look at this lake. I think this is really nice here, and I actually take off my boots and take my socks off and put my feet in the water. I found it was a nice way to cool down, and that with the sun on your face is really a nice thing. And as I'm doing so, I hear something in the water. Now again, it sounds like somebody's thrown something, or there's a boat that's just come ashore. I look around, half expecting to see somebody dragging things up, but I can't see anyone or anything. I presume that maybe it's a fish, but I don't think the fish here are that big, and that's not how they would normally act. I decide instead that it's high time just to get back. Now the trash is smelling pretty bad at this point, and I kind of swung it round on itself so that way it wouldn't make that much of a smell when I was walking and would kind of seal on itself. And would you know, it splits open. So now I have to spend a while trying to put things on it again and getting it back to normal and kind of making the bag smaller and the smell stronger. As I'm doing this, I noticed some more trash up ahead of me, which is strange because I was sure I cleared the path perfectly. I now know that people probably come past here recently, and I go to pick it up. It looks like some kind of note, but I don't bother actually looking at it and just put it straight in the bag. I continue on my walk now, and eventually I get back, throw that nasty stuff away, and actually have a shower there. I know that's kind of like ironic to some people listening because obviously I still have to go back for the wetsuit thing, but I just don't want to smell bad. And I'm quite germophobic, I think that's how you say it, but I don't know, I just don't like germs at all, and I was starting to smell a bit where the bag had opened on myself, but not to worry. I have my nice shower and I get a big thick bag now. I make some notes of what I'm doing in the day because where I work we have to log everything that we're doing. It's just like a general process, but it's important for security reasons. So I say goodbye to the dirty clothes and step out in the new ones with the new bag and everything ready. Now there was some cloud cover so it is a little bit darker, and it also meant I didn't need my sunglasses and I could in fact wear my normal glasses, which I was happier doing so. Now I'm able to see a lot more clear this time, and it probably would have been a good idea to bring them before, but that's in hindsight. So I start making my way again, and I realise that there's more and more trash. I keep on putting them in the bags again, and I think this is a little odd, and it's also annoyed me because obviously I probably left the trowel with this stuff and not realised it, so now I'm doubling up on my job. The other issue I have is that there's more important things for me to do later in the day. I actually have to install a sign somewhere later on, and I'm not looking forward to it because that thing's heavy. So I just continue on and eventually make it up to where that wetsuit thing is. Now that's the thing, I say where it is because I can't find it. I can find the silhouette where obviously it was in the water before and left a water print, but there's no wetsuit to be found. I look around everywhere and I really can't seem to find it. I think maybe it's drifted in again, and what do I see? Just floating off on the shoreline, I can see it, probably about a mile away or something, and it's on the other embankment. This is no issue for me though, my friend, because I have to go over there with that sign, so I'm not too bothered. I just think it's odd because it shouldn't have been able to slip down because it was actually on some high ground, but not the kind something could roll off of, so I think this is bizarre, but again, I think maybe I'm having a bad day and I'm going a bit senile, or I don't know. So I just pick up more and more trash, and that's when I notice something odd. It all seems to be paper with things scrawled onto it, and I think, well, someone must have done some weird art project, or it was some young kid that was doing drawings and their parents didn't want to take it home. Okay, but that doesn't explain why it wasn't there earlier. So I quickly retraced my steps and ended up finishing the trash rounds. Ah yes, my favourite part of being a ranger that I missed so much, and what was actually an addition to what I was doing originally, but we'll talk about that another time. Now, I start walking back and I have a strange feeling. It's almost like there was somebody else there with me, but of course there's no one around. It actually isn't uncommon to have this feeling and sense, and I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm someone that picks up on these things well, but it's just a feeling I'd noticed a few times before in this line of work. You're taught actually to listen to it and not ignore it because it might be a sign of, I don't know, somebody in danger. But I checked the log and there's no such reports, so I know that there's definitely nothing wrong. So I just kind of shake it off and get back. Now I'm a bit more annoyed because I have to bring this heavy signpost, but that's fine. At least I'm actually going to get that thing that I saw earlier. I decide once again not to log it though, because I'm going to have a long day at this point. So I start my trek. I have to walk quite a number of miles to get through to the other side of the lake. And as I'm walking, I notice something. There's two people in a canoe, but I can't really make out much about them. They're kind of in the shadow side of a cloud, if you know what I mean, so I can't really see any details in particular. But they're not supposed to be here. I know that much for absolute certain, and I wave at them and call out. What was a little creepy is they both stop and seem to stare at me. And it could be my eyes playing tricks on me, but it almost looks like one of them's wearing a kind of plague doctor outfit. It's not exactly the same as like the European ones that we had, but it's not far off, and I think this is really weird. Again, I haven't got the best of eyes, and stupidly I don't have binoculars with me, so I can't get a closer look. But I decide that I should meet them on the other side because I think maybe they're the ones who have the wetsuit, and I have a few questions for them. So I start walking now. Every so often I can make them out for a little bit, but then they dart in between trees. My line of view is blocked is what I'm saying basically, but I'm a persistent being, so I keep going. Now, it doesn't take too long, and eventually I get to roughly where they should be, but they're nowhere to be found. I don't know if you guys have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's almost like when the boat just sunk into the water of that weird guy with the tentacles, but they've just vanished now. I'm not really sure exactly what to make of this, but I can only presume that yes, they have gone to the other side of the embankment. Now, I'm not too much further away now, but I'm getting a bit irritated now because this is the kind of stuff that makes you have a really long day, and guess what, my boss doesn't care. He'll just let me have overtime when I'm working till like 9 or 10 at night, then want me to come in at 8 AM the next day. Yeah, you can imagine why I had to leave this place, but anyway, I digress now. So, I'm not too much further away now, and I'm very perplexed about as to where they could have specifically gone. It really doesn't make sense to me how they've just gone under. I mean, is there some kind of big iceberg which I'm missing and they've gone into it like the Titanic? Maybe. But the water doesn't feel that cold. Now, I was so curious as to where they went, I was half tempted to go for a swim. I mean, it'd be quicker than walking, but obviously I'm not going to do that. So I just make my way over to the embankment, and there it is. The wetsuit. It seems to have come snagged upon some logs and things that have fallen off from trees, so I go over to it. And that's when I suddenly feel fear come across my entire body, and I'm kind of froze, just fixated on it without thinking. It suddenly hits me, this could actually be a body. It doesn't look like the wetsuit I saw before, and I think maybe this is a person who's drowned. And I get some adrenaline, and I very slowly proceed. Something feels a little off about this situation, and it literally looks like a headless thing there. I get a big stick and I decide to poke it. I know that's 100% not what I'm supposed to do in this line of duty, but I don't know. There's nothing else I can actually think of doing that's probably going to work now. And that's when I realise something rather bizarre. Some kind of stuffing comes out, and it's not a body at all. It's almost like a farmland scarecrow, but it kind of looks weirdly put together, almost like the Catwoman suit. No, this is where things are really weird, because this was the thing I saw earlier, but it didn't have anything in it. So that raises a question. Who filled this thing up, and why was it here on this bank? I think that's really weird, so what do I do next? Well, I grab another stick, an even bigger one this time, and kind of drag it ashore. And there's some stuffing falling out, which is kind of like originally a white colour, but it's gone to more of a dark cream, I guess. And I'm able to take it ashore, and I leave it there. I'm staring at this thing, which is almost like the farmland thing I said about, but not quite, and I don't know what to make of it. I finally call out, "Hey, whatever you're doing, you're not supposed to be," and I get a response, at least in my head, telling me to get out of there. Now, I guess some of my survival instincts finally kicked in, and to be honest, they're not always the best at all times. Not again for the work I was doing, but that's another reason I left, but hey. So, I start walking back now, deciding that this is something I should probably tell the guys about, and not necessarily investigate alone. I mean, all we've got between me and the relative safety of our office building thing, well, not a building, but you know what I mean, is the water, and I'm not going to swim. That's when I see what appears to be the two figures I saw earlier, this time on the shoreline. Now I get a much better look at them this time, and this is pretty bizarre what I see. I can see they've stopped to look at me, and one's tall but the other's relatively small. They're dressed exactly the same. They have kind of like a weird half pointy hat on, and kind of not exactly a robe but some kind of gown on, in a weird black but waxy outfit. It's different from what the mannequin was, but they don't say a word. I call out and do a big Y symbol with my hands trying to get their attention, but this doesn't work. I have a weird feeling about this, and this is another weird thing. They both start walking towards me, literally into the water. They walk until they're about head height until they just stop, and seem to vanish underwater. Now, this only took about 10 seconds, and I decided I was going to wait them out, and finally they resurfaced again. Now both going in different directions. One is going towards our station place, and the other is coming more towards me, walking slowly along the shoreline. Now, I'm pretty confused here. I go around to look at that mannequin thing and it's still there, but I decide that it's probably best if I get away from whatever this is. Now, annoyingly, I have to kind of trek through some of the more foresty area to get back. I wait for a little bit just to figure out where they're going, and definitely one's coming towards me, but annoyingly it's kind of blocking off the safe route that I already come along. I decide that I am going to have to go through this much more treacherous area, but that's fine. I've got some pretty good boots for it. Now, for some reason I didn't feel terribly under threat at this point. It's probably because the area was so nice, and it was quite a good sunny day, so I didn't feel too bad. The only way I can describe my feeling is like something was just way off, and I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Now, again, I don't always react with the best survival instincts, so I didn't have anything to arm myself. I just decided to pick up a stick. Funnily enough, it wasn't even a big one, but I guess I could have launched it at somebody if needed, and maybe they would flinch react and that would give me time to run away, so yes, this is the escape plan. Now, this scarecrow thing goes out of sight for quite a while, and I just stop. I think, well, why am I getting so scared of this? Is this really a threat? Or am I the ranger here? Who's in control of the situation? And I relax myself a lot more. Now, I'm stood like this for probably about 20 or so minutes, just really confused as to what to do. And I now realise that I was probably in shock a little bit, but at the time I didn't know that. I just thought I was dealing with the situation accordingly to what I could see around me. And now, as I'm standing there, I can hear something breaking through the trees. I think, God, what now? And I quickly take a step back, and I manage to get behind a tree. And I then catch sight of it. I can see one of those things now. It's a smaller one, but where its face should be, it's wearing some kind of skull mask, and it has black face paint on. Now, I'm telling you this because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I really couldn't. And what do I do in this situation? I get my stick and throw it as far as I can to try and distract this thing. And then it dances towards it, almost like a dog going after some kind of treat or animal, but literally dancing while doing so. I now have some real fear running through my bones, and I start making my way in the opposite direction. Now, I couldn't hear this thing, it almost just gone silent again, and whatever this is, person or God knows what, didn't seem to be following me, and I let my guard down a bit. I've now come to the conclusion that there's some pretty weird cult people out here, and maybe they're trying to get me, and maybe, just maybe, I've come across some kind of crime scene they don't want me to know about. So, I have to start making my way now, tediously, around the lake, to try and get to relative safety, and my mind slips. I completely forget about the other one. Now, I make it probably about halfway across to the relative safety and where I have a truck, but I hear something up ahead of me again. This time it sounds much more forceful and quick, so I quickly duck down. I laid there for probably a good 5 minutes until I lock eyes with it. It was an animal. I can't remember exactly what animal it was. It was like a big rodent, but it slowly makes this merry way towards the water, and I kind of cursed myself a bit just for being so scared. I say, come on, you have to get a hold of yourself and get a grip now. Now what's especially bizarre is that's when I notice it, what appears to be a body floating in the lake. I now realise that this is that thing I'd moved earlier. It was now floating further across, and I observe it until it comes up on the bank again, and then I see it. That person goes to grab it, but they're assisted by another one, equally as tall as them. I now realise that there's at least 3 people here. They're dressed exactly the same, and they drag this over to the shore and leave it there. Now, I was really glued into the spot for quite a long time. I'd actually stared at this whole event taking place for so long that when I looked away, my eyes took a long while to adjust to not looking at bright things again. And it was almost like, I don't know what you call it, snow blindness, but I was pretty much experiencing a form of this, because I'd been staring at God knows what this was for so long now. And I'll take a deep breath, look around and realise that I'm gonna have to get myself out of here. Now, I'd actually gone off the path that I was on earlier, and I'm on a bit of a rough area a little bit, and it's not really good for crossing. I now know that I can take the long route to get back, and that's what I decide to do. I have to crawl across some areas and I'm probably gonna get wet, but that's kind of the least of my issues at this specific point. I can kind of go into one of the streams that actually feeds the larger lake that I've just come from, and I'm kind of doing like a military prone crawl around here. I don't know who these folks are, but for all I know there could be 100 of them out of here, and I'm on my own, so even though I'm not the smallest and I'm a little bit built, I really don't like my chances, and things like this really give me the heebie-jeebies, so yes, it's time to escape. Now, as I'm crawling, I don't hear anything. I still have another stick that I've picked up, and for some reason it made me feel a lot more safe. Maybe it's some kind of primitive thing and that's why cavemen always seem to have sticks, but in this specific moment that's what made me feel better and that's what counts. I wasn't that far away from safety, but I come up to the first kind of wetland area and I really feel a bit cold because of the water. I've also managed to scratch up my elbows and my belly and my knees a bit, and I'm now bleeding. I was a little bit worried about getting infected because it's quite dirty here, and you can imagine there's all kinds of bacteria and insects, and I hate both. I know some of you are probably asking, why did I do this job if I don't like those things, and I can't tell you that. I don't really know myself. But now, I'm not too far away from the relative safety of things that I know. I managed to come up to kind of like a clearing where I can actually see across to the lake. I'm pretty worried now that maybe they've followed me around, but there's no one in sight. Now my own breathing was pretty heavy now, but then I hear another kind of breathing not too far away from me. This sounds like quite a heavy breathing, almost like it's being filtered through something. Not exactly like Fader's one, but maybe 10% similar. Almost like that you're wearing something over your face. Not a scarf, but like a plastic one. And I stop dead. I can hear this breathing, but I can't figure out where it's coming from. I know it can't be far away. It never seems to get closer though, and now I don't have the element of surprise because I cannot gauge it. I try my best to stay still and I feel my legs starting to shake, so I tense up my leg muscles and stop myself from shaking. Now this breathing does not stop whatsoever, and I'm now at a point where I must go forward to try and get to better things, and I decide that I should slowly but carefully crawl my way forwards once again. I decided that I wasn't going to stop crawling no matter what, and that's what I start doing. Now I realise that the breathing sound is slowly getting further away with each crawl that I make forward. I managed to get about 5 minutes further from this point and I can't hear the breathing anymore. I decide it's safe to look up, and that's when I see it. Some dark figure not too far off, but this time on the other side. That's when I can see it. There's burning. I try and figure out exactly where this thing is specifically, and I'm able to approximate it to where I saw that wetsuit thing before, or the farm figure, whatever it is. There's a very thick black smoke coming off of it. I'm quite worried now that there's going to be a forest fire, but it doesn't seem likely because it's close to the shore, but that raises the question. How did that fire start and why is it there? Now, I'm not sure what to do at this point, and I start crawling again. I'm not sure whether there's multiple fires or only one, but I know that I'm not going to stick around to find out. And I eventually crawl up to the point that I'm not too far away from the station now. I start to feel a little bit better, and then I feel it breathing on my neck. Now I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but my god man, it's like somebody takes your soul. It's almost like your brain accepts, maybe it's some kind of prehistoric man thing, but it accepts that you've been captured and you have a second to make a decision. So, with my stick in hand, almost like it was second nature, I turn around and swing as hard as I can, literally with my eyes closed, and there it is, whack. I feel a sudden pain in my hand, and I realise that I'm bleeding. My hand's now wet. I realise that some of the stick is shattered and splintered into my hand, and that's when I see it. Somebody hits the ground with a large thud, and I can't make out a face, but they're dressed in some really weird kind of occultist outfit. It's like a weird dark robe, and then I get up and run. Now this person was pretty big, probably 6 feet and at least 200 pounds, but I couldn't stop to take in too many details, and before I knew it, I make it back to the station, and I actually take off my shirt to try and stop my hand from bleeding because I was worried I was going to bleed out. I quickly get in and scream on the radio for backup and help. While the radio's still on, I make a call out to the local fire responders and say that there's a fire here. I'm not sure what to do, so I quickly go to the kitchen area and get all of the knives and hide them away. I get the biggest one I can find and I grab that. I lock all of the doors and stay on the radio with my friends, who are also my colleagues here. They can't believe what I'm telling them, and apparently the fire people are going to get there first. I warn them that there's strange individuals out here, and they say they understand. It must have took about another 40 minutes though of waiting in agony before they finally get here. And once they do, I quickly point out to where the fire was. It's now gone out, and they say that they're going to investigate. Eventually a few others who work here also arrive, and some law enforcement too, and they say that they're going to take over the search from here. I give the exact location of what had happened and one of the policemen who's first aid trained actually helps to get my hand patched up. I'd really hurt my hand, but luckily it wasn't broken or fractured, which is a good thing. Now, I ended up waiting in that station for quite a long time, until eventually the fire people come back first and say there's no signs of fire, just some ashes, where something was burned. They said it was clothing, but they couldn't determine which because of the fire. But there was definitely no immediate threat, and that was a relief. That was my biggest fear. A beautiful place like this should not burn to the ground, and if there's one person that can stop it, I'm gonna make sure it's me. Now, second, the police come back and say that they really can't find anyone, and they ask for an entire report of exactly what had happened. I give them everything, and they kind of doubt what I was saying, constantly saying, "Are you sure this is what happened?" And I say yes, and they start doing some weird things, like asking if I've taken any prescription drugs or anything. I say yes. How do you think this happened to my hand? And they say that they're going to keep some people stationed here and try and investigate until they find out what's happened. Now, eventually I got put to a different area. In fact, it wasn't even to do with the forest, it was actually on the admin side. Eventually I had to leave the job because I just couldn't bear the thought of going back there. Now, we were never able to find out exactly how many people were there, or what they were doing, or why they were there. And since there's no reports of similar events happening, I can only imagine that it was some kind of cults doing some really weird, ritual or whatever they want to do out there. And maybe they were trying to capture me for some kind of human sacrifice or God knows what. I'm just very happy that I managed to stop at least one of those and give them a taste of their own medicine before they got me.